Welcome to another session of Loan with Jen podcast. We've got an estate attorney here today, and we are talking about why every homeowner needs a will. John Strohmeyer is an expert here in Houston, where I live, estate attorney for many, many years. In fact, he's helping me with my stuff right now. John, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jen. It's good to be back.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're becoming a regular guest. I love it. All kinds of issues that we need to talk about. Okay, so first burning question. Tell me why, like what could go wrong? Why do I need to worry about a will and testament?
Why? I mean, it seems so simple.
Homeowner?
Like, why can't people just get this stuff when you pass off? Now, we're talking about loans, and that always leads back to the loan that you got to buy a house. And the important thing is when somebody passes, we have to have some chain in title, a link in title, to get it from the person who died to the person who owns it next. And if you don't have a will, or in some cases a transfer on death deed, but basically some official document that you can file in the property record saying the dead person's not here and this person now owns it, what you open yourself and your relatives up to is an heirship proceeding. So this is HEIR-SHIP, not AIR-SHIP.
Yeah.
Where we determine the heirs, and the heirs are going to be whoever the legislature said should inherit your property. Generally, it's spouse and kids, but it could be complicated. If you've got multiple spouses, kids with multiple partners, it's going to get more complicated and more expensive. And this is where you'll see a lot of the things scaring you about, a court will decide who your heirs are. No, I mean, the rules are already set up. We already know who they are. It's not going to go to somebody random, but you're imposing additional cost, delay, and headaches on the people who should get it if you don't have something in place. Now, if you've got a will or deed or something that takes care of this, well, then you've identified who gets your stuff when you're gone. And that's why, that's why you have a will when it comes to a house, but it also applies to when the rest of your stuff. Why should you have it for any of it? You want to make sure the right people get your stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm just thinking of, young couples. They're thinking, oh yeah, I mean, when I was young, I thought I was bulletproof. I didn't think always about this stuff, but if something were to happen when you're younger, even before you have a lot of assets, I would think that, like you said, making sure it goes to the right people in a speedy fashion. Let's say you have kids, I would assume like you want your kids to keep living in the house, and you need to say who's going to be the guardian of the kids. So if that stuff isn't set out in stone, it takes a while. Like how long? Like how long does it take if this isn't done? The probate process.
If it's not done, we tell clients to expect a speedy resolution of it. If we're doing an heirship proceeding, is 6 months. That's if everything clicks along, because it just takes longer, because the court's going to have to appoint another attorney to verify the story we tell. Just because your heirs come in and say, well, we're the only ones, the court has to do its work to make sure, well, you are actually the right ones, and you didn't leave out, Sister Susan, who nobody really liked anymore, and so that, we cut her, we didn't sign off on the paperwork, we didn't disclose her. The court has to make sure they got everybody, warts and all. So this is where you're cutting off that cost, the time of appointing that attorney, just all the headaches that are going to go along with that. And you'd mentioned something earlier about, well, when do you think about this? It's once you start having stuff. If you've got stuff that can't just be put in a moving box and moved away, it gets harder by not having something in control. A rough way of thinking about it, there's something in Texas called the small estate affidavit. We can use it for folks who die with a small enough amount of property, and that's generally under $75,000. We don't like having real estate in there, because if you do, it can only go to your surviving spouse or minor children, not adult children, minor children. And so if you've got that less than $75,000 with some carve-outs and things like that, and no house, maybe you don't need to worry about anything else. Your family can come in and sign that form, and you submit it. A few weeks later, the court will send it back. But outside of that, like, we really only think about that for kids who just turned 18. If you're between 18 and 25, you'll have a car, maybe you'll have a bank account with $3 or $4 in it. Yeah, and your stuff. And so we don't need a will for them. But once you start getting your stuff, it's not the document really that anybody really needs. It's more, have you thought through what happened? Who's going to get it, and how are they going to get it?
So when people do have wills in place, and I know every case is different and how complicated the estate, but let's just say the average person who has a house, You've got a little bit of stuff. How long does regular probate that's done with the proper things in place, how long does that normally take?
If everything rolls along the way it's supposed to, we'll have an initial application that gets filed the same as we'd have with an heirship. But instead of that 6 months to get to court, we're looking at just waiting, getting in line immediately. We're not coordinating with some other attorney. So here in Harris County, it's been about 6 or so weeks once we file before we can get a hearing. They just opened a new court, so hopefully that'll start bringing those times back down to where, you may wait for a month or so for a hearing. And again, we're looking for a time for you and the attorney to go before the court for about 15 minutes to get everything lined up.
So just while we're talking about timeline, I think it's relevant. But let's say we're in the middle of buying or selling a house and the seller dies, one of the sellers die.
Right.
And let's say there is a will in place. Like, we can't just close the next day as normal. It's got to go through something, right? Like, that would pause everything.
No, it'll pause everything because nobody has the authority to sell the house. Even if the will says, I leave I leave the entire house, I leave everything to Jen. Jen, you cannot go to court, or you can't go to closing tomorrow because the will is not valid until it's been admitted to probate by the court. So you're going to have to wait that time to get that lined up, get the will admitted.
So it can take 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah.
It'll take 4 to 6 weeks. And if somebody has died, we'll get calls pretty frequently. Hey, so-and-so has died. Can we just get a deed to put the house in our name? No, you can't. Nobody has the authority to sign that deed.
Yeah.
The person has died. Well, they wanted us to.
Okay.
Apparently not enough to sign something before they pass to say that. So we get lots of, hey, we're closing soon. We need to get this wrapped up quickly. Again, there's no last will. It's going to take months for that closing.
Okay.
If there is a will, we may be delayed by 6 or so weeks to get somebody with the authority to sign. Again, that's also assuming all the beneficiaries agree to selling it, because if somebody wanted the house, you don't necessarily want to sell it out and pick a fight with someone.
So let's talk about, there's a time and a place for everything. So not everybody needs to hire an attorney. Like, I'm hiring you. I have a pretty big house. I've got assets. I've got kids. I've got in-laws that live with me. I'm not going to DIY. Okay. And so thanks for all the help you've given me so far. But for people that are like, I don't have that much, I don't want to pay a bunch of money, I just want to, how could someone do it on their own? Let's say they don't have that much stuff, but they have a house and they want to make sure it's taken care of.
Right.
They download something off the internet. What do they do?
Yeah. Look, why do you pay anybody for anything? You pay for it to get done faster and easier, so you don't have to worry about the result being incorrect. This is something we do all the time, so we know what to look for. If things are simple, sure, you can write your own will. You can download some form off the internet, LegalZoom or Will and Trust. Most of them will work. The problem is, will it work for you and your particular circumstance? So if everything's simple, if you're just leaving it kids, leave it to your spouse, otherwise the kids outright or something like that, it could work. But of course, things can go wrong. It seems so simple, but there are so many ways that you can, we've seen it where people have minor children and they're leaving assets to them outright. Well, the risk with that is, if you leave it to them outright, if they're a minor, you've just triggered a guardianship. And the moment they turn 18, they're going to get all those assets outright, which means 5 minutes later, they're getting turned into Maseratis, cigarettes, and Fabergé egg. And that's probably not what you had in mind.
So there's some dynamics there that should be, it's helpful to talk to someone. But if they did DIY it, let's say they download something, they get it. No, obviously it has to be notarized. And then you got to give somebody the copy of the will, right? Because obviously if you die, no one's going to know where it is. So
right. We need to know where the original of that document is, not just the copy.
Okay.
And so making sure people can find that. It's effectively like a treasure map. How are we going to find your treasure and get it to the right people? If we don't have the map, if we don't have a good list of assets, nobody's going to know what to do. They're just going to be scrounging around trying to find it.
Got you. Well, I really appreciate you going over this really important topic. Is there anything that I've left out that you think people need to know when they're doing a will for their house, their stuff?
For their stuff. The idea is we want to make sure that we're addressing what's going to happen. What are those headaches that are going to come down the line? How can we think through them now so that they're solved later?
Gotcha. Good. Well, I really appreciate it. I'll put John's info in the show notes, in the description. If you're in Texas, in Houston specifically, you can call him. Do you do other parts of Texas or mostly Houston? I guess you could do.
We're mostly focused on, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio area. But we have clients through
anywhere in Texas. Great. Awesome. Thanks for joining us again. My favorite legal expert. Thank you, John. Take care.
Of course. Thanks, Jen.